There's a moment in every person's life where everything they thought they knew about their world suddenly changes. For me, it happened when I was told to leave my own home, a place I had spent years building, not just with bricks and wood, but with love, sacrifice, and effort. It was the last place I expected to feel alienated, the last place I thought I would ever be unwanted. And yet, that's exactly what happened. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. I had always believed that family was everything, that no matter the struggles or setbacks, we would stick together. The years I spent working late nights, overtime, and doing everything I could to provide for my son, Michael, and his wife, Glada, were not just about money. It was about ensuring they had what I never did: security, comfort, the things that make a home more than just a building. My pride in them was immense. Michael had always been my pride and joy. And Clara, well, she was part of the family. From the moment she came into our lives, I thought we were a team. I thought we were strong. But, as it often does, life threw me a curveball I couldn't see coming. I remember that evening so vividly. The night, everything changed. It started like any other Sunday. We had gathered for dinner, as we always did. The house filled with the warmth of good food and the familiar clink of utensils on plates. The smell of roasted turkey lingered in the air. And for a moment, everything seemed just as it should. But there was something off, something I couldn't quite place. Michael, usually so talkative, was quiet, his eyes darting between Clara and me. His lips were tight, as though he was struggling with something. Clara, on the other hand, was unnervingly composed, her smile too perfect, too forced. She had been acting strange for weeks, but I had dismissed it. Perhaps she was just tired, overwhelmed by the demands of life. Or so I thought. Then, out of nowhere, Michael spoke. His voice was cold, so different from the boy who used to run to me for comfort. He cleared his throat, and the words he spoke hit me like a punch to the gut. "Dad, we need to talk. You're not needed here anymore. We've made a decision. You need to leave." I sat there, stunned. My heart raced, and for a moment I thought I must have misheard him. But no, the words were clear, and they stung with a finality that I couldn't ignore. The room felt like it was closing in on me. I could barely process what was happening. My son, my flesh and blood, was asking me to leave, as though everything I had given him, everything I had worked for, meant nothing. Clara's words only made it worse. "It's time for you to move out. Henry," she said, her voice soft, almost sweet. But there was an edge to it. "You're not a part of this family anymore." The shock of it all was overwhelming. I couldn't fathom how this had happened, how things had gotten so bad. I had given them everything: my time, my effort, my love, and yet it seemed all of it had been erased in an instant. My home, once filled with laughter and warmth, had become a battleground. I was no longer needed. I was no longer wanted. I didn't know what hurt more, the words themselves or the realization that they didn't even hesitate. There was no remorse in their eyes, no sign of the family I thought I had built. They were done with me, and that was that. It was a betrayal I never saw coming, a gut-wrenching betrayal that would change everything. But as I sat there, alone in that silence, something inside me stirred. A sense of clarity began to form, slowly but surely. They had underestimated me. They thought they could push me aside, discard me without consequence, but they hadn't counted on my strength. The strength I had kept hidden for far too long. And this time, I wasn't going to bend. I wasn't going to break. This was my home, my life, and I wasn't going to let them take it from me without a fight. I could still hear the echo of Michael's words, the harshness of them lingering in the air, long after the dinner table had fallen silent. His tone, so cold, so final, left no room for argument. No space for the man I thought I still was in their eyes. It was as though a part of me had been erased, wiped clean from their memory as if I never mattered. And Clara, my wife of so many years, stood there, her arms crossed, agreeing with everything Michael had said. The woman I had once trusted, the woman who had shared my dreams, my hopes, and my life, was now an ally to a decision that felt like a dagger to my heart. The pain was suffocating. I wanted to shout, to ask what had happened to the family we once were, to demand answers, to fight for what I thought was rightfully mine. But as I looked at them, I realized something: there was no point in pleading anymore. They had made their choice. They had chosen to discard me, and no amount of explaining, no amount of love, could undo the betrayal they had chosen. But in that moment, as the anger and hurt swirled inside me, I began to feel something else, a deep, unmistakable clarity. This wasn't the end. It was simply the beginning of something I had avoided for far too long. For years, I had put everything into providing for my family. I had sacrificed time, energy, even parts of myself, believing that if I worked hard enough, if I loved enough, everything would fall into place. I thought that love, hard work, and sacrifice were enough to hold everything together. But now, sitting in the same house I had built with my own hands, I realized how wrong I had been. I had given everything for them, yet it wasn't enough. It had never been enough. As I stood there, feeling the weight of their words crush me, I started to understand something. They didn't just want to take my house, my assets, or my financial stability. No, they wanted to take control over my life, over my choices. They wanted to erase me, as if I were just another obstacle in their path to whatever it was they thought they deserved. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. This wasn't about the house or the money. This was about respect, about dignity, and about standing up for myself when I had spent so many years allowing others to dictate my worth. I felt a shift within me, a quiet determination rising from deep inside. It wasn't just about losing my home or my family anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my self-worth, my peace. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. Not without a fight. I turned and walked out of the room, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I didn't look back, not because I wasn't hurting, but because I knew that looking back would only pull me back into the same cycle of emotional manipulation and control that had defined my relationship with Michael and Clara for so long. This time, I wasn't just reacting. I wasn't just going to give in. I was going to take control of my future, even if it meant fighting them in a way they never saw coming. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. The pain of betrayal, the sorrow of seeing my son and wife turn against me, would stay with me. But something inside me, something that had been dormant for years, was awake now. It was time to fight for myself. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing up not just for my home, but for the person I had forgotten I was. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was in control, and I was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that this time I wasn't backing down. As I walked through the house, each step felt like a weight I couldn't shake. The walls that had once been filled with the sounds of my family, the laughter, the stories, the small moments of connection now stood silent, like a hollow shell of what it had been. My heart ached, but something else was stirring within me, something deeper than the hurt. It was as if the darkness of betrayal had shifted into something more manageable, a spark of clarity, a quiet but firm voice, telling me that I no longer had to accept being the victim. I could feel the anger rising inside me. But it wasn't the kind of anger that clouds your judgment. No, this anger was different. It was the kind of anger that forces you to look at things for what they really are. Michael and Clara hadn't just dismissed me. They had erased me. I had given them everything: my time, my energy, my love, and yet it was never enough. They saw me as a stepping stone, someone they could use to get what they wanted. And the second I no longer served that purpose, they discarded me like an old piece of furniture. But what I was beginning to understand, as the sting of their words echoed in my mind, was that this wasn't about the house or the money. It was about respect, something I had given them in abundance, but had never received in return. This was about me finally realizing that I wasn't just a provider or a background figure in their lives. I had been the foundation of their existence. Yet they saw fit to knock me down, to replace me with their idea of a better life. They didn't just want the house, or the wealth I had accumulated over the years. They wanted to take my place in the family, to strip me of my identity, my sense of self-worth. And for the first time, I realized that I wasn't going to let them do it. I stood in the middle of the living room, looking around at the familiar surroundings. The furniture was the same, the photographs on the walls, the old armchair by the window. All the things that once represented warmth and belonging now seemed foreign. But I wasn't going to let this place, this home I had built with my own hands, be taken away from me. I wasn't going to let them erase me. Not this time. The realization hit me like a wave. I had spent too many years living in the shadow of others' expectations, working, sacrificing, loving without question. But now I saw it clearly. I had been trapped in a cycle of giving and receiving nothing in return. I had put everyone else's needs before my own. And in doing so, I had lost sight of who I was. Michael and Clara had made it easy for me to ignore my own needs, to ignore my own voice, because they relied on me too much. But now, they had gone too far. They had crossed a line I couldn't ignore. I was no longer the man who would bend to their will. I wasn't going to beg for forgiveness or ask them to love me. I had spent my life doing that, and it had gotten me nowhere. It was time to reclaim my life, to stand up for myself in a way I never had before. For the first time, I realized that I deserved better. I deserved respect. I deserved to be seen as more than just a means to an end. I made my decision right then and there. I wasn't going to fight for their approval anymore. I wasn't going to fight for the family I thought I had. I was going to fight for myself, for my dignity, for my peace, for the life I had built. And so, as the reality of my situation settled in, I knew that the next step would be a hard one, but it would be mine to take. I was done being the passive player in my own story. Michael and Clara had taken control of my life for far too long. But now, I was the one who would decide what came next. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick. But I was ready to reclaim what was rightfully mine. For the first time in years, I felt something other than the suffocating sense of obligation that had been hanging over me. I felt a quiet but powerful sense of clarity, and I knew that I was ready to take action. I wasn't just going to be pushed out of my own home, my own life. I was going to fight back. After that moment of clarity, when I finally realized that I had been living in the shadows of my own family's expectations, I knew it was time to take action. I couldn't just sit back and let them erase me. Not after everything I had done. Not after all the sacrifices I had made. The house, my home, the foundation I had built for them, was mine to protect. I wasn't going to let Michael and Clara take it from me without a fight. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my identity, and my right to be treated with respect. They had taken advantage of my love for them, twisting it into something they could use against me. But I was no longer that man, the one who silently accepted whatever was thrown his way. No, this time, I was going to stand up for myself. I was going to fight back. I stood in the living room, looking around at the familiar surroundings, the pictures on the walls, the old furniture, the places I had once shared with them. But now, those places felt empty, like ghosts of a family that no longer existed. The warmth, the love, all of it had evaporated. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that the fight I needed to fight wasn't just for the house, it was for my own future. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of determination that had been absent for far too long. I knew that to fight this battle, I needed help. I couldn't navigate the legal mess they had created on my own. So, I reached out to Peter, an old friend from my days working in engineering. He had retired as a lawyer years ago, but I knew he still had the sharp mind and the experience I needed. I wasn't about to let Michael and Clara use their cunning to manipulate the system. This was my home, and I was going to keep it. Peter didn't hesitate when I called him. His voice was steady, calm, and full of purpose. As soon as he picked up the phone, he listened carefully as I explained the situation, how they had asked me to leave, how they had turned their backs on me, and how they were now trying to take control of everything I had worked for. Peter didn't ask unnecessary questions. He understood immediately what I was facing, and he agreed to help me. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and gathering every document I could find. I searched through old receipts, bank statements, tax returns, and any paperwork I could get my hands on. Michael and Clara had been reckless, assuming that they could erase me without consequence. But they had underestimated me. I wasn't going to let them get away with it, not without a fight. Peter and I worked late into the nights, putting together a plan. The strategy was simple, but effective. We needed to secure the house legally, making sure that no one, especially Michael and Clara, could get their hands on it. We started the process of setting up a trust that would legally protect the property, ensuring that I had control over it and that their claims would be voided. For the first time in a long time, I began to feel something resembling hope. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't powerless. I had options, and I was going to take them. Michael and Clara thought they could push me aside, but I was ready to fight back. I wasn't going to be the passive figure I had been for so long. This time, I was going to take control of my life, my home, and my future. But even as I made these plans, a small part of me still wondered how we had gotten here, how the people I loved the most had turned into strangers who were willing to betray me so easily. But there was no time for self-doubt now. The time for questioning was over. Now, it was about action. I had made my decision, and there was no turning back. It was time to fight for what was mine. It was time to reclaim control. As Peter and I began to put together our plan, the weight of what was at stake became all too real. I wasn't just protecting the house or my assets anymore. I was protecting my dignity, my right to be seen and respected. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This was no longer about Michael and Clara's demands. It was about making sure that they understood the gravity of what they had done, and that they couldn't just walk over me, take everything, and leave me to pick up the pieces. I spent the next few days diving deep into the legal side of things. Peter and I were in constant communication, working through the legal details that would protect my assets. The trust we were setting up wasn't just a safety net for the house, it was a fortress, a shield that would ensure that Michael and Clara could no longer manipulate the situation. This wasn't just about winning a battle for a piece of property, it was about sending a clear message. I was done being passive. I was done letting others decide my fate. This house, my life, was mine to control. The more I looked over the paperwork, the more I realized how little Michael and Clara understood what they had done. They thought they could just push me aside, dispose of me like I was an inconvenience, and everything would continue as it had been. But they didn't know me anymore. I wasn't the man who had bent to their will for years. I wasn't going to just accept their betrayal and walk away silently. I was fighting for my life, my future. And that meant taking control, using everything at my disposal to ensure that they couldn't get away with it. The legal battle was daunting, but it wasn't as complicated as I had feared. I had worked hard all my life. And now, in a way, all those years of dedication were finally coming to my aid. Peter was a steady hand through it all, guiding me through the process and making sure every document, every detail, was in order. It was strange how quickly everything started falling into place. It was like I was finally putting together the pieces of a puzzle I had been avoiding for years. I still had moments where doubt crept in. What if this wasn't enough? What if Michael and Clara found a way to get around it? But as I sat there with the trust documents in front of me, something inside me told me that this time, they couldn't win. They had thought I would just sit back and let them take what was mine. They had underestimated my resolve. And now, I was making sure that no matter what happened, I would walk away from this situation in control of my own future. The more we worked through the legal details, the more I realized something else. This wasn't just about protecting my home. It was about reclaiming my life. For years, I had been the one who always gave, always sacrificed. But I had lost myself in the process. I had allowed Michael and Clara to dictate my role in their lives, to decide what I was worth. But no more. Now, I was taking back the power. I wasn't going to let anyone, not even my own flesh and blood, take what I had built. By the time we had everything in place, I could feel a shift inside me, a quiet strength that had been missing for so long. The fear, the uncertainty, had faded away. I was ready. Ready to fight for what was mine. Ready to face whatever came next. And as I signed the last of the legal documents, I knew this battle was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. This was my fight, and I was going to win it. The day of the court hearing came faster than I had expected. And with it, a quiet storm of nerves and anticipation. I had spent the last few weeks preparing, gathering every piece of evidence, every document, every piece of information that could show the truth of what Michael and Clara had tried to do. Peter had been a constant source of support, helping me ensure that everything was airtight. But as I sat in the courtroom, with the cold, sterile walls surrounding me, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It wasn't just about the legal battle. It was about standing my ground, about reclaiming my dignity, and showing Michael and Clara that they couldn't take what was mine without consequences. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with the weight of the battle ahead. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. But I stood tall. I had spent years building a life for my family, sacrificing everything to ensure they had a better future. And now, I was here, standing up for everything I had worked for, everything I had earned. Michael and Clara were sitting across from me, their faces tight with discomfort. Clara, as cold and composed as ever, didn't even look at me. Mikkel, my son, the one who had always been my pride, looked almost ashamed. I could see the hesitation in his eyes, a flicker of doubt that hadn't been there before. But it was too late. They had already crossed a line, and now they would have to face the consequences. The judge entered the room, and the proceedings began. Michael was the first to speak, his voice shaky but firm. He tried to paint me as irresponsible, as someone who had failed to manage my finances, as someone who had let the house fall into disrepair. He even went so far as to claim that I was hoarding money while the family struggled. The words cut deep, but I didn't flinch. I had expected this. He was trying to shift the blame, to make me look like the villain, but it wasn't going to work. I knew the truth, and I was ready to speak it. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, but I refused to let it intimidate me. I wasn't going to let them see my fear. I wasn't going to back down. I had worked my whole life to build something that mattered, something that would last, and I wasn't going to let them take that from me without a fight. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady. I have spent my entire life providing for my family. I have worked long hours, sacrificed my time and energy to ensure that my wife and son had everything they needed. I built this home with my own 2 hands, and now my own flesh and blood is trying to take it from me. They're trying to rewrite the history of what I've done for them, to erase me from my own life. But I won't let that happen. I could feel the weight of the room shift as my words filled the space. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes avoiding mine. Clara remained as cold as ever, but I knew she was listening. I wasn't just speaking to the judge. I was speaking to them, to the people who had discarded me without a second thought. This house, this life, was built with love, with sacrifice. I continued, my voice growing stronger with every word, and I won't let them take it from me. Not now, not ever. The judge listened intently, and I could see that my words were making an impact. The case wasn't over, but I had made my stand. I had shown them that I wasn't going to be pushed aside, that I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. When the judge finally spoke, his words hit me like a wave. The court has reviewed the evidence, and I am ruling in favor of Mr. Wilson. The trust will stand, and the property will remain under his control. Michael and Clara, you are hereby ordered to vacate the premises within 30 days. It felt like a victory, not just a legal one, but a personal one. For the first time in so long, I felt like I had won, not just for the house, not just for the money, but for myself. I had stood up for myself, and I had taken control of my own fate. As I walked out of the courtroom, a sense of calm settled over me. The battle wasn't over. I knew that, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. I had won this round, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. The house was still mine. But more importantly, I was still here, and that was something they couldn't take away. The judge's words echoed in my mind as I walked out of the courtroom, my heart still racing, but with a strange sense of peace settling in. The ruling wasn't just a legal victory, it was a personal triumph, a hard-earned declaration that I had taken control of my life again. Michael and Clara's smug faces, their belief that they could easily manipulate the situation, had been shattered. They thought they had won, that they could push me aside. But today, I had shown them that I wouldn't be a passive figure in my own story any longer. I could still feel the tension in the courtroom as I left, like an invisible weight that had been lifted from my shoulders. The path ahead was still uncertain. There were still so many loose ends to tie up, and I knew that Michael and Clara wouldn't just walk away quietly. They had lost this battle, but they would likely keep fighting, trying to find ways to reclaim control. Yet, for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready, ready to reclaim my life, my future, and my dignity. The following days were a blur of activity. Peter and I went over the court ruling again and again, ensuring that everything was in place. The trust was set up, the legal barriers were firmly in place, and the house my home was secured. But even as I took those steps, there was a quiet, nagging sense of emptiness. This wasn't just about the property anymore. It wasn't about the money or the house itself. It was about the years of betrayal, the broken trust, and the realization that I had given so much of myself to people who had never truly appreciated it. Walking back into the house that evening, I could feel the silence in the air. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, felt different now. The laughter was gone. The love had faded. And all that was left was an emptiness I didn't know how to fill. But as I walked through the rooms, it became clear to me that this was not the end. I had won the legal battle, but the emotional journey was far from over. It was time to take the next step, to rebuild what had been broken, not just with Michael and Clara, but with myself. As the days passed, I kept my focus on the victory I had achieved in court. Michael and Clara had 30 days to vacate the property, and the legal process had ensured that they couldn't access anything without my approval. But there was more to this victory than just the legalities. I had gained something much more valuable, the knowledge that I was capable of standing up for myself, of fighting back when I had been wronged. The weight of my past, the years of being the provider, the fixer, the person who always gave and never asked for anything in return, started to lift. The anger I had carried for so long began to fade. I had taken back control, not just over my home, but over my own life. However, it wasn't just about the house anymore. It wasn't about the victory I had secured in court. It was about the internal peace I was beginning to find. The peace that came with knowing I no longer had to live for anyone else's expectations. I had spent so much of my life focusing on what my family needed, that I had neglected what I needed. Now, for the first time in years, I was starting to rediscover myself, to my passion and my freedom. I stood in the kitchen one evening, looking out the window at the fading light, and I realized something. I had won not just the battle for the house, but the battle for my peace, the battle for my sense of self. The house was still mine, and no one could take that from me. But more than that, I was still here. I was still standing, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be, ready to take on whatever came next. As the days passed, I began to settle into the stillness of the house, a quiet that I hadn't fully appreciated before. It was strange how something so peaceful could feel so heavy. The echoes of the past, of laughter, of love, of moments shared with Michael and Clara still lingered in the corners, though now they seemed distant, like fragments of a life that no longer existed. The house, still standing strong, no longer felt like the home I had once cherished. It had become a symbol of everything I had lost, everything I had worked so hard to build and protect, only to have it crumble in an instant. But despite the emptiness that surrounded me, there was a quiet sense of peace beginning to settle within me. The victory in court had been important, don't get me wrong, but the real victory, the one I hadn't expected, was the inner peace. I was starting to feel I had spent years fighting for my family, sacrificing everything for their well-being, and in the process, I had neglected my own needs, my own desires. Now, for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything to anyone. I wasn't just the provider or the fixer, I was Henry, standing alone but stronger than I had ever been. The emptiness of the house was suffocating, yet liberating. Each room I walked through, once filled with the bustle of daily life, now felt like a reflection of my journey, a journey that had led me here, to this moment of clarity. The memories that once filled these walls felt like ghosts, reminders of a life that had slipped through my fingers. But with every step, with every deep breath I took, I began to understand that these memories, while painful, were part of my story. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't running from them. I was standing face to face with them, accepting them as part of who I had become. I still thought about Michael, about Clara, and the betrayal that had torn us apart. The hurt ran deep, deeper than I could have ever imagined. They had been my family, and yet they had treated me as though I meant nothing. I couldn't understand how the people I had given so much to, the people I had sacrificed for, could just turn their backs on me without a second thought. But even as that anger simmered within me, I realized something important. They had shown me who they were, and that was something I couldn't change. What I could change, however, was how I responded to it. I didn't have to carry the weight of their actions anymore. The burden of guilt, kind of constantly feeling like I had to make up for their mistakes, was no longer mine to bear. I had already given everything I could, and it hadn't been enough for them, but it had to be enough for me. The silence in the house was no longer something that suffocated me. It was something I could fill with my own thoughts, my own choices, and my own sense of peace. As I walked through the empty rooms, the pain of the past still stung, but it was fading, slowly, bit by bit. I was learning to let go. The house was still mine, but more importantly, I was starting to feel like I was mine again. I didn't need Michael's approval, or Clara's. I didn't need to be the man they wanted me to be. I was Henry, and I was learning to embrace that again, without guilt, without regret. The battle wasn't just about the house or the money. It had never been. It was about reclaiming myself, my dignity, my worth. And as the days passed, I found myself looking forward to a future that I hadn't thought possible. A future where I could finally live for myself. And in that, I found peace. I had fought for everything I had. And now, I was ready to live on my terms. As the days turned into weeks, the quiet of the house no longer felt like a reminder of what I had lost. It began to feel like a canvas empty. Yes, but full of potential. Each corner I walked through was an opportunity, a chance to rebuild, to take back control of the life I had let slip away without even realizing it. The house, once a symbol of betrayal, was now a symbol of freedom. And for the first time in what felt like years, I could breathe without the weight of constant expectation pressing down on me. I spent the first few days after the court ruling sorting through the remnants of the past. I cleared out old boxes of photos, mementos, and keepsakes, things that once held great meaning, but now felt like chains binding me to a life I was leaving behind. It wasn't easy. Photo. Each trinket was a reminder of better days, of the family I had hoped for, the family I had fought for. But it was time to move forward. The past had shaped me, but it didn't define me anymore. I had spent so many years consumed by my responsibilities, providing for Michael, Clara, the house, the bills, believing that If I just kept giving, kept sacrificing, everything would turn out okay. But now, in the aftermath of everything, I realized that I had been living for everyone else and not for myself. I had poured all my energy into others, into making sure they had what they needed, that they had a better life. But in doing so, I had neglected my own desires, my own needs. I had let the world define me. And now, for the first time, I was ready to redefine who I was. The first step toward that new life was taking care of myself, something I hadn't done in years. I began going for long walks, something simple but freeing. The brisk air against my skin, the rhythm of my steps, gave me a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. It wasn't just about the walks, though it was about reconnecting with myself. I was no longer just the father, the provider. I was Henry, a man with his own hopes, dreams, and desires, and that was something worth fighting for. I also started looking into the things I had put off for years, things that had been drowned out by the noise of my life. Photography had always been a passion of mine, but it had taken a back seat to everything else. I dug out my old camera, dusted it off, and began exploring again. I didn't need to be perfect. I didn't need to create a masterpiece. I just needed to capture the world through my own eyes, to see it in a way that felt authentic to me. The first time I went out with my camera, I felt a spark, a reminder of who I had been before life had taken over. And that spark grew with every shot I took. It wasn't just the photos. It was the act of creating again, of doing something that was purely for me, not for anyone else. The house was slowly being transformed as well. I started painting the walls, rearranging the furniture, filling the empty spaces with the things that had always mattered to me. I added new things, 2 little touches that reminded me of the life I wanted to build now. The old armchair by the fireplace, once so familiar, was replaced with a new one, comfortable and inviting. The family photos on the walls were replaced with new artwork, things that spoke to the person I was becoming. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about making space for a future that was entirely my own. As I began to rebuild my life, something else shifted within me. I wasn't just focused on moving forward. I was learning to forgive myself. For so long, I had carried the weight of guilt for not being enough. Guilt for not seeing the signs sooner. Guilt for thinking that love and sacrifice were enough to hold everything together. But I had done my best. I had loved with everything I had, and in the end, that was all I could do. The rest, the betrayal, the loss, it wasn't mine to carry. And as I let go of that guilt, I began to feel lighter, freer, more at peace with myself. The road ahead was still uncertain. I knew that there would be moments of doubt, moments where the past would try to pull me back into old patterns. But I was no longer afraid of it. I had learned something important. Peace doesn't come from the absence of conflict, but from the ability to move forward, despite it. The house was still mine. But more importantly, I was starting to understand that I was still me, and I was worth fighting for. This was my new beginning, and I was ready to embrace it, step by step. As the weeks went on, I could feel the momentum of my transformation slowly taking root. The house, once a place of conflict, was becoming a reflection of the life I was starting to build for myself. The walls that had seen the breakdown of my family were now filled with the quiet hum of new possibilities. The old photographs of Michael and Clara had been replaced with new art that spoke to my soul. Each day felt like a small victory, a step away from the past and closer to a future I had once thought out of reach. But as I continued to rebuild my life, I realized there was one final piece of the puzzle I needed to face: Michael and Clara. They were still in the back of my mind, though I had made my peace with the reality that our relationship would never be the same. The betrayal they had inflicted upon me had changed everything. They had erased me from their lives without a second thought, and I couldn't allow myself to forget that. But even so, a small part of me still wondered, could there ever be a chance for reconciliation? Would I ever truly be at peace with them? Or was this the end of the story for us? One afternoon, as I sat on the porch, the sun casting a warm glow across the yard, I received a letter. It was from Michael. My first instinct was to throw it out, to pretend I hadn't seen it, to leave the past buried where it belonged. But something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the quiet sense of peace I had been cultivating. Whatever it was, I opened the letter. The words were simple, but they hit me harder than I expected. Dad, I don't know how to fix what's happened between us. I know I've hurt you, and I can't take that back. But I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say it anyway. Please know that I'm trying to change. I'm trying to understand. I hope you're doing okay. For a moment, I sat there, the letter in my hands, feeling a mixture of emotions: surprise, anger, and something else. Relief, hope. It was strange. Michael's apology, though not perfect, was the first sign of remorse I had received. But as I read his words, something inside me told me that I didn't need to respond right away. I had spent so much time waiting for others to fix things, for others to acknowledge the hurt I had carried for so long. But now, it was different. I didn't need their apology to heal. I had already taken the first step in that process on my own. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer, not because I wanted to forget it, but because I knew I had to let go. I had spent years living for others, trying to fix relationships that weren't meant to be fixed. It wasn't about what Michael or Clara thought anymore. It was about what I thought. It was about what I needed to move forward. I continued to focus on myself, on the life I was creating. I took more time to invest in things that brought me joy: photography, volunteering, connecting with old friends. I started exploring the world again, not out of a need to escape, but because I was finally free to enjoy it. The past had shaped me, but it didn't control me anymore. I had learned that I could rebuild, that I could grow beyond the pain of betrayal and disappointment, and that's what I did. The final lesson of my journey wasn't just about standing up for myself, or winning the legal battle, or even reclaiming my home. It was about understanding that life is full of twists and turns, and that not all relationships are meant to be saved. It's about knowing when to fight for what's yours, and when to let go. It's about finding peace in the silence, even when the echoes of the past still linger. Sometimes, the greatest act of strength isn't in holding on, it's in letting go. And as I stood on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I finally felt like I was ready to embrace whatever came next. Because, for the first time in years, I wasn't living for anyone else. I was living for me. And that, I realized, was all I ever really needed. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.